Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into a book that is, I think, probably one of the most essential and complicated works in the American literary canon.
Absolutely. We're talking about Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which came out in 1885.
And our goal here isn't really a traditional literary critique. We want to do a systems analysis. We're going to treat this novel almost like a manual.
A manual for what, exactly?
A manual for understanding how the mechanisms of culture, race, and systemic injustice all kind of combine to shape and, maybe more importantly, to deform our individual moral perception.
That really is the heart of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
The reason this book is still so controversial, the reason it's constantly being debated and challenged, is because it just refuses to give you any easy answers.
No, it doesn't.
Twain is holding up this giant mirror to America, and it reflects these deep systemic moral contradictions about culture and race, but he doesn't wrap it up with a neat little bow at the end.
He doesn't offer any platitudes.
None. So that's our mission for this deep dive, to really dig into how our moral judgment gets trained by these unjust social frameworks.
Yeah.
And crucially, what it actually takes for a person to break free from that conditioning.
Exactly. So we're going to be looking past the plot summary. We're focusing on the architecture of compliance that Twain so brilliantly maps out through the eyes of Huck Finn.
It's just an incredible study in how a community's institutionalized evils can pathologically warp the very idea of doing the right thing.
It turns morality completely upside down.
Okay, so to understand the diagnosis, I think we have to start with the diagnostician himself.
Mark Twain.
Right. Samuel Langhorne Clemens, born in 1835. He grew up in Hannibal, Missouri, and that place really became the model for all the little river towns in the book.
And even his name, his pen name, tells you something. Mark Twain.
It's a riverboat term, right?
It is. It means 2 fathoms deep, which is basically water that's just barely deep enough to navigate safely. It's treacherous.
So he's signaling right from the start that we're heading into some morally murky waters here.
I think so. And you have to remember who he was when he wrote this. He was already a very established humorist, a satirist. People knew him for his wit.
But this book feels different. It's funny, but it's dark.
It is, and his worldview was becoming profoundly pessimistic around this time. He had had some devastating financial losses, but more than that, the deaths of his wife and 2 of his daughters. It changed him.
And his satire got sharper.
It got much, much darker. You see this really biting cynicism in his later works, like The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson or A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
So he wasn't trying to offer any kind of moral comfort. He was, as you said, diagnosing.
He was using satire like a scalpel to dissect American hypocrisy. The critic H.L. Mencken had this great line about him.
What was that?
He said Twain had a truly amazing instinct for the truth and this incredible ability to just strip away all the deceptive husks of tradition, prejudice, flubdub, and balderdash.
That's a great quote. He just wanted to show the ugly truth under the polite surface.
And that search for truth is complicated by the timeline of the book itself, which is it's a bit tricky.
Right, because the story is set in the 1830s or 40s. It's pre-Civil War.
Exactly. He's capturing a world where chattel slavery is the absolute unquestioned baseline. It's the economic system, it's the social system, it's just how the world works.
But he didn't publish it until 1885.
And that gap is everything.
Why is it so critical?
Because he's writing about a world where slavery is a given, but he's publishing it in the middle of the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. And this was a time when all the fragile gains that had been made for Black citizens were already being systematically destroyed.
The foundations of Jim Crow were being laid.
They were. This is the period leading right up to the debates around Plessy v. Ferguson, which would eventually make separate but equal the law of the land.
He's holding up the moral decay of the past
to criticize the moral decay of his present. He's showing how the old justifications, the old prejudices, just kind of mutated into new forms of oppression even after a war was fought to end them.
And his main tool for this whole diagnosis is the voice of a kid.
The ultimate outsider, Huck Finn.
An illiterate, superstitious river rat, a total social outcast.
Why do you think that child's perspective is such a powerful tool for him?
Well, because Huck, unlike all the civilized adults, he hasn't fully bought into the system's rationalizations yet. He's not there.
He's still raw.
He is. He's this raw, immediate observer. So he acts like an uncorrupted lens that just magnifies the corruption and, frankly, the pathological behavior of the adult world and its institutions.
The church, the family, the courts.
All of it. He has no sentimentality about any of it. He just sees what's in front of him.
And his voice, his language, reflects that. It's been called plain Americanese. It's vigorous, it's understated, it's grainy with these very specific details. I mean, you just contrast the way Huck talks with the flowery, nonsensical speeches of the king and the duke.
Or the rigid religious language that Miss Watson uses.
Exactly. Huck's language is the language of survival. Theirs is the language of control and pretense.
Which I think brings us right to the central thesis for our deep dive today.
Okay.
It seems that Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is fundamentally showing how our moral judgment is shaped by our social systems. And, crucially, how doing the right thing, what Huck's sound heart tells him to do, can feel exactly like doing something terribly wrong, like violating his deformed conscience.
Yes, that's the core conflict. It's when the moral institutions that are supposed to be teaching you right from wrong are themselves inherently unjust, built on a foundation like slavery.
So this battle between the heart, that immediate recognition of another person's humanity.
And the conscience, which is really just inherited cultural software telling him that his human connection is a sin.
That tension is the whole system Twain is putting under the microscope.
So let's move into the actual mechanisms of that corruption. I think the key distinction is between the raft and the shore. The shore, all those little towns along the Mississippi, that's where the system operates in full force. And what Twain is mapping out is the structure of slavery, but not as an individual evil.
Not just one bad guy on a plantation?
No, not at all. It's presented as the unchallenged, normalized economic and social backbone of the entire community. It's just there.
It's the air they breathe, and you see that right away in how they talk about Jim. It's all about property and dehumanization.
He's not a person. He has a price tag. $800.
Which was a huge amount of money in the 1840s. He's an asset, he's capital, he can be traded, stolen, or sold down to New Orleans.
And being sold down the river wasn't just a phrase. New Orleans was the epicenter of the domestic slave trade. It often meant permanent separation from your family and the most brutal labor imaginable on the sugar plantations.
So that threat is the most extreme form of terror the system can deploy.
It is, and you even see this with Huck's father, Pep Finn. I mean, this is a man who is the absolute bottom of the social ladder. He's an abusive, racist drunk.
But even he is fully invested in the system.
Completely. He goes on this tirade against the government because he saw a free black man from Ohio who was educated and well-dressed, and Pap is absolutely furious that the government would allow this man to vote instead of being sold at auction.
So even the lowest white man in that society feels entitled to the privileges of that racial hierarchy.
It shows how deep the programming goes. But maybe the most chilling example of this normalization, for me, is Aunt Sally.
Yes, the scene in chapter 32.
Huck shows up pretending to be Tom Sawyer, and he's late. So he invents this story about a steamboat boiler explosion that delayed him.
And he says, "We blowed out a cylinder head." And Sally asks if anyone was hurt. And Huck says, "No, killed a nigger."
And her response is it's breathtaking in its moral emptiness. She says, well, it's lucky because sometimes people do get hurt.
It's lucky because people, meaning white people, didn't get hurt. The death of a black person just doesn't register. It's a non-event.
And she's not presented as a monster. She's supposed to be this simple, kind Christian woman.
Which makes it worse.
It makes it so much worse. That one line reveals the depth of the systemic rot hiding just beneath the veneer of good manners and civilization. The violence isn't just a whip. It's the complete linguistic and cultural erasure of personhood.
And that normalization is what creates Huck's central conflict. The whole system is designed to train his conscience to work against his natural empathy.
His deformed conscience, as the critics call it, is screaming at him that helping Jim escape is an enormous offense.
He's stealing property.
He's stealing Miss Watson's very valuable property. He's violating his moral education, his religious education, everything he's ever been taught about how the world works.
The very education Miss Watson tried to give him to civilize him.
Right. And it all comes to a climax in that famous scene where he decides to write the letter to her. He genuinely believes he's a sinner. He thinks he's going to burn in hell for helping his friend. He feels this immense weight of social shame and guilt.
So he tries to do the right thing. He tries to betray Jim.
But he can't.
He can't. His sound heart, his immediate unconditioned instinct that was forged on that raft through shared experience, it rebels.
He remembers their conversations, Jim protecting him, Jim's kindness.
And in that moment, he has this epiphany that the entire moral framework he's been given is fundamentally rotten, and his decision, all right, then, I'll go to hell.
That's him consciously rejecting the only morality his society ever offered him.
His moral growth happens in spite of his education, not because of it.
He even says later something like, it don't make no difference whether you do right or wrong. A person's conscience ain't got no sense. It just goes for him anyway.
He's realizing the conscience is a faulty tool in a corrupt system. It's designed to make him feel ashamed for doing the one truly decent human thing he's ever done.
And this systemic corruption isn't just about slavery. I mean, it infects every community they land in on the shore.
The towns are like these little laboratories of social decay. It's all frauds and feuds and spectacle.
You see it perfectly with the king and the duke.
The ultimate con artists.
They call themselves low-down humbugs and frauds, and they succeed by playing on two very basic human failings: greed and sentimental blindness.
They know exactly which buttons to push.
They do. They cover their lies in this layer of theatrical spectacle, like the ridiculous Royal Nonsuch show.
Right.
Or that incredibly elaborate, tear-filled performance they put on at the Wilkes funeral to steal the inheritance. They understand that if you wrap a lie in enough emotion and drama, people will just shut down their critical thinking.
They'll pay for the show.
Yeah.
Or hand over their life savings.
Or they'll just kill each other over nothing, which is what we see with the Grangerford-Shepardson feud.
That's the perfect example of institutionalized, pointless violence. I love when Buck Grangerford tries to explain it to Huck.
He has no idea how it started.
None. He just says there was some trouble and a lawsuit and one man shot the other, which he would naturally do, of course. Anybody would.
The logic is completely circular. Violence is just sustained by tradition, not by any reason. The system has normalized generational murder to the point where a child thinks it's natural.
Twain is just as brutal in his critique of mob mentality.
Oh, Colonel Sherburne's speech. It's short, but it's devastating.
So the mob comes to lynch Sherburne for shooting a drunk man named Boggs in broad daylight.
And Sherburne doesn't even flinch. She just walks out onto his porch roof with a shotgun and calmly dissects them. He calls them cowards.
He tells them they're not real men, that a real man is a rarity.
He says their courage is borrowed, they're brave as a mob, but alone they're nothing. He says the pitifulest thing out is a mob.
And he just stares them down, and they break apart.
He stops them just by diagnosing their weakness. It's this incredible commentary on how collective moral outrage is often just a performance, a kind of theater that lacks any real individual courage.
And through all this systemic failure on the shore, the one constant is Jim's humanity.
He's the moral anchor of the entire book. The system is relentlessly trying to erase his personhood, to reduce him to property, but he just continually displays these profound, undeniable human qualities.
The story he tells about his daughter, Elizabeth, is just, it's heartbreaking.
It is. He talks about hitting her for not listening to him, and then he discovers
That she'd had scarlet fever, and it left her deaf. She couldn't hear him.
And his shame and his tenderness in that moment. Oh, she was plumb deaf and dumb, Huck. Plumb deaf and dumb, and I'd been a treating her so. It just encapsulates his depth of feeling, his love as a father.
And his loyalty, too. It's absolutely. In those final kind of crazy chapters, he risks his own freedom, which he'd been waiting for this whole time.
Which, as it turns out, he technically already had.
Right, we'll get to that. But he risks it all to stay and nurse Tom Sawyer, who's been shot.
An act of pure self-sacrifice. And it even prompts the doctor who's treating Tom to say something very telling.
He says, a nigger like that is worth $1,000, and kind treatment, too.
It's the ultimate Twain irony, isn't it?
It's incredible. Even as he's acknowledging Jim's profound moral superiority, he can't help but quantify his value in market terms. $1,000.
And then, almost as an afterthought, and kind treatment, too. It just shows how impossible it was, even for a supposedly good person, to escape that property narrative.
So this all brings us back to Twain's method. The satire is a diagnostic tool, the constant casual use of the racial epithet. It's not just Twain being a product of his time, it's his sharpest, most relentless piece of irony. It shows how deeply racism was embedded in the language itself, even in the supposedly pure heart of a boy like Huck. The language itself is a form of systemic assault.
Which is why Twain puts that notice at the very beginning of the book. He explicitly warns the reader not to look for a simple motive, moral, or plot.
He's telling us to look somewhere else.
He's telling us that the real value of the book is in its sprawling, satirical observation of the system itself. He's forcing us to move beyond what we expect from a novel and to really look at the mechanics.
So if we're going to treat this as a manual, if the world of the novel is a machine designed to produce this deformed conscience, let's actually map out the components.
Okay, let's get specific. Let's talk about the behavioral engineering that keeps the whole thing running.
Right, the systems map.
Yeah,
You have to start with the actors.
absolutely. So first you have the enslaved people, represented by Jim. Their driving incentive is freedom and family. They're forced to operate completely outside the law just to achieve the most basic human rights.
His plan isn't just to be free himself.
No, his plan is to earn money to buy his wife's freedom, and then they would work together to buy their children. Or, if that failed, he said they'd get an abolitionist to help them steal their own kids. It's this incredible mix of capitalism and law-breaking just to have a family.
Then you have the white citizens, people like Aunt Sally or the neighbors at the Wilf's place.
They are the embodiment of hypocrisy. They can weep over a completely fictional drama cooked up by the king and the duke, but they participate in actual structural cruelty without batting an eye. They are the passive enforcers of the status quo.
And then you have the children. Huck is the system's test case.
He's the crucible. He starts with that natural sound heart, but he's under constant assault from the external moral code, which becomes his deformed conscience. The whole book is the battle for his soul.
And finally, the authority figures.
Right. You've got Miss Watson, who represents this rigid, formal, religious morality that has nothing to do with actual empathy. Pap Finn, the total outcast, who still weaponizes the system to enforce white supremacy. And Judge Thatcher, who means well, but is constrained by the very legal system that defines Jim as property.
Okay, so those are the actors. What about the incentives that lock them into these roles?
I'd say the number one incentive, especially for Huck, is simply conformity. Just the drive to avoid trouble and blend in.
He says that explicitly about the king and the duke. He knows they're frauds from the beginning.
But he keeps his mouth shut. He says, it's the best way, then you don't have no quarrels and don't get into no trouble. In a system this corrupt, silence is a survival strategy.
And that's reinforced by the incentive of social survival.
Hugely. Huck is terrified of what would happen if the word got all around that Huck Finn helped a nigger to get his freedom. He's more afraid of the social shame of what people would think of him than he is of any legal punishment.
The system has weaponized shame.
Perfectly. And then, of course, there's the big one. Profit.
The $800.
That price tag on Jim drives everything. It drives the slave catchers, it drives the scams. The king and the duke's entire grift is based on turning human emotion into cash. Every relationship is filtered through this financial lens.
So you have the actors and the incentives. But the system needs stories to justify itself. The narratives.
Right, the formal justifications that make the injustice seem legal, inevitable, even righteous.
The first one is tradition and civilization. This is the Widow Douglas and Miss Watson. Good manners, clean clothes, saying your prayers.
But it's a completely performative morality. It's all on the surface. It has no connection to actual empathy.
Then the big one, property.
The most dangerous narrative of all. The legal definition of Jim as chattel, a piece of movable property. That narrative is powerful enough to override everything else. His personhood, his family ties, his acts of loyalty and kindness.
It's what allows those otherwise decent townspeople to watch a family get torn apart at the slave auction. Just let it happen.
And the final narrative, which Twain satirizes so brilliantly, is doing things the right way.
This is Tom Sawyer.
This is all Tom Sawyer. His obsession with doing everything by the book, the romance novels, the adventure stories. He insists on following these grand literary precedents, no matter how impractical or cruel they are in reality.
Okay, so this is where the feedback loops come in.
Yeah.
This is how the structure sustains itself.
Let's trace it. It starts with moral training. Huck is told by everyone, the church, society, that helping a slave escape is a mortal sin.
That leads to obedience. He tries to obey that training by writing the letter to Miss Watson.
And that act of obedience would result in an act of profound cruelty, the betrayal of his friend.
But here's the system's genius. That cycle leads to normalization. When Huck tears up the letter, he doesn't feel relief. He feels wicked. He feels ashamed of his own moral impulse.
He describes himself as wicked and low down and ornery. His conscience, which was programmed by the system, is punishing him for doing the right thing. The feedback loop successfully turns guilt into a tool of social control.
It forces him to internalize the system's blame.
And you see how resistant this is. Look at the Wilkes scam again. The townspeople feel a little uncomfortable when the king and duke sell the enslaved family and split them up. They call it scandalous.
A momentary twinge of empathy.
Just a twinge. Because the official narratives of property and legality immediately kick in and override it. The sale happens. The system sustains itself because the institutional justification is always stronger than personal intuition.
And that's what's so important about this. Twain is mapping these recurring patterns. This isn't just a story about the 1840s. He's showing us how these unjust systems work, period.
He's showing us that we all inherit moral frameworks we didn't choose. Huck was brung up wicked, but he still internalizes the judgments of his society.
The deformed conscience is the inherited software.
It's the pre-installed program. And the sound heart is that basic human instinct for connection. The whole book is about whether the software can be overcome.
Which explains why these systems feel so normal from the inside. How can Aunt Sally be a kind person and also a casual racist?
Because the racism is woven into the social contract. It's normalized. The system's longevity makes the injustice itself invisible. It's just the baseline reality.
So it takes this huge revolutionary act of will for Huck to violate that code, even though we, the readers, can see that the code is morally bankrupt.
He's risking hellfire just to treat his friend like a human being.
And that's where we come back to his realization. A person's conscience ain't got no sense and just goes for him anyway.
When the system's broken, your conscience becomes a liability. It's no longer a reliable guide.
And this is why the satire is so important. Twain's method, the humor, the absurdity, it's like a Trojan horse.
It gets past your defenses. If he had just written a straightforward essay against slavery and racism, it would have been preachy, easily dismissed.
But by creating these ridiculous characters like the King and the Duke, he makes you laugh first.
And then, after you laugh, you're forced to recognize the terrifying critique that's hiding underneath it all. As Mencken said, he's stripping away the deceptive husks.
He's forcing us to look at the mechanics of power, not just the stories power tells about itself.
Which brings us to Huck's own language, his plain Americanese, and his talent for telling stretchers, for lying.
Lying becomes a moral tool for him.
It's a survival tool. He notes at one point that telling the truth involves taking considerable many risks. In a corrupt world, lies become the currency of the moral agent who has to operate outside the official structures.
So if we're looking at this recurring structure of injustice, there's another critical lens to apply here, one that some critics have brought up that really ties into that idea of improvisation and survival.
You're talking about the blues matrix.
Exactly. Critics like Ralph Ellison and Albert Murray have looked at this novel through that lens. Can you sort of unpack what that means?
Sure. It's a fascinating idea. Basically, they argue that the novel operates within this cultural framework that would soon give birth to blues music itself.
So what is the blues in this context?
The blues is defined as a kind of first-person musical narrative or meditation on a life of trial and trouble delivered in a comic mode. It's about facing catastrophe head-on with resilience.
And that fits Huck's emotional state perfectly.
To a T. His constant feeling of being lonesome, of being blue, wishing he was dead, that's the classic blues condition. He's always trying to manage his own despair. There's a moment when he's alone on Jackson's Island before he finds Jim, and he says something like, "There ain't no better way to put in time when you are lonesome. You can't stay so. You soon get over it."
He's actively working on his own emotional state.
He is. And Jim sets this tone, too. When Huck asks him about good luck signs, Jim's response is pure blues philosophy.
What does he say?
He says there are mighty few good luck signs, and they ain't no use to a body. What you want to know when good luck's a-comin' for, want to keep it off.
Huh. So don't waste time looking for good luck. Just focus on dealing with the inevitable trouble.
Exactly. It's about confronting reality with resiliency. And in this framework, the path to freedom is improvisation.
Which is Huck's greatest skill.
It is. His constant need to invent new identities, Sarah Williams, George Peters, and to spin these elaborate lies on the spot. It's like a blues musician taking a solo. It's disciplined, creative freedom in response to a hostile environment.
He's a blues hero, improvising his way to survival.
And the river becomes the stage for this. The raft is this temporary magical space. It's a moral sanctuary.
The critic Toni Morrison wrote about this, didn't she?
She did. She said the conversations between Huck and Jim on the raft are so free of lies, it produces an aura of restfulness and peace unavailable anywhere else in the novel.
It's the only place where Huck can be himself.
And that peace is only shattered when Huck violates that trust. when he plays that cruel trick on Jim after they get separated in the fog, pretending it was all a dream.
And Jim's response is the moral core of the entire book.
It is. He doesn't just get angry. He explains the nature of friendship and betrayal. He says, that truck, that is trash. And trash is what people is that puts dirt on the head or they friends and makes them ashamed.
He gives Huck the only true moral lesson he gets in the whole story.
And Huck's response is a landmark. He apologizes to Jim. He, a white boy, apologizes to a black man he's been taught to see as property. He says, I could almost kissed his foot. I done it, and I weren't ever sorry for it afterwards.
That real shame, the shame he feels for hurting his friend, is what finally corrects the fake shame his deformed conscience was feeding him.
And that brings us to the most controversial part of the book for many readers. The ending. The whole section with Tom Sawyer's return.
It feels like the book just screeches to a halt and becomes a silly comedy.
It can feel that way, but through this systems lens, and especially the blues lens, it's actually the most pointed satire in the entire novel. Tom shows up and turns Jim's escape into this elaborate, cruel game based on his adventure books, all while knowing that Jim has already been legally freed in Miss Watson's will.
So Jim isn't even a runaway slave anymore.
He's a free man. But Tom Sawyerism, that obsession with doing things the right way according to romantic, outdated rules, prolongs his suffering for no reason other than Tom's own entertainment.
What is Twain saying with that?
He's offering a brutal commentary on the failure of Reconstruction. He's saying that even after Black Americans were legally granted freedom, the adherence to old traditions, bureaucratic nonsense, and romanticized ideas of the past, Tom's books serve to prolong their agony and deny them true, practical freedom.
Tom is the system's folly made flesh.
He's the total opposite of the blues improviser. Huck improvises out of love and for survival. Tom improvises for literary pretense, torturing Jim just to live out his fantasy.
So to tie all of this back to our show's core themes, the problem Twain is showing us is fundamentally structural. It's the system of civilization itself that's the villain.
That's the key takeaway. Huck's shame over helping Jim shows how the system forces us to individualize institutional blame. He thinks he is wicked, not the institution that created the law he's breaking.
It's a perfect example of how moral intuition is shaped by environment. The conscience isn't some pure internal compass. It's a program written by society.
Which means, and this is crucial, that conscience alone is unreliable when the system is corrupt. Huck's greatest moral act is to defy his conscience.
His sound heart has to correct his social programming.
Yes. And this idea of inherited frameworks and systemic normalization is something we've come back to again and again in our deep dives. Twain is giving us a 19th century masterclass in analyzing the architecture of injustice.
So when we step back from this, after this really deep dive into the material, what does Huckleberry Finn help us see differently?
I think first, it's a profound lesson in social conditioning. It shows just how easily people, even people with fundamentally good hearts, can internalize and defend incredibly destructive social norms.
How systemic evil can be made to feel safe and normal, even righteous.
Second, it gives us a really radical definition of moral courage. True courage isn't found in obeying the rules or following the law. It's often found in defying all of that.
Huck's most moral act is also his biggest crime.
Which points to the third thing, the enormous gap between legality and justice. The most legal, respectable thing Huck could do is turn Jim in. That is the greatest moral wrong in the book.
And the greatest moral good helping a man be free is a crime.
When a system is unjust, morality and legality can become opposites.
And I think the final provocative thought comes from Huck's final decision in the book. He learns Aunt Sally is going to adopt and civilize him.
And he says, I can't stand it. I've been there before.
And he decides to light out for the territory. He runs away from civilization one last time.
And that final act of resistance suggests something really powerful. It suggests that sometimes true ethical clarity can only emerge from disobedience, from rejecting the institutional status quo.
That true freedom, whether it's the improvisation of the blues or the clarity of a sound heart, is found on the raft, on the river, outside the established corrupt path.
It's just an incredibly powerful, uncomfortable, and absolutely essential text for anyone who wants to understand how systems warp our sense of right and wrong and what it takes for one person to try and reclaim it.
The author, of course, is Mark Twain, whose birth name was Samuel Langhorne Clemens. We strongly encourage you to read or reread Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, perhaps using these system matching tools as a fresh guide, or borrow it from a library. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis and Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.